beginning, there was nothing. No light, no stars, no earth, only the voice of the Almighty echoing through the void. With a single command, he spoke, and creation was born. This is the story of beginnings, the story of a world formed by divine hands, a paradise lost by human disobedience, and a promise that would shape the destiny of all mankind. It is a tale of faith and failure, of great men chosen by God, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who carried a covenant that would bless the nations. And through trials and triumphs, betrayal and forgiveness, we follow the journey of Joseph, a boy cast into slavery who would rise to rule a kingdom. This is Genesis, the first book of the Bible, the foundation of everything we know. Let us journey back to where it all began, the creation of the world. In the beginning, before time itself, there was nothing but God, eternal, almighty, and full of glory. Then, with his divine word, he spoke creation into existence, shaping the heavens and the earth by his power. Day 1, light pierces the darkness. The earth was formless and empty, shrouded in deep darkness. But God commanded, "Let there be light." And at his word, light burst forth, piercing through the void. He separated the light from the darkness, calling the light day and the darkness night. Thus the first day was completed. Day 2, the heavens above. On the second day, God stretched out the sky, creating a vast expanse to separate the waters above from the waters below. He called this expanse the heavens, forming the atmosphere that would shelter the world. Day 3, land, seas, and vegetation. On the third day, God gathered the waters into one place, revealing dry land. He named the dry land earth, and the gathered waters seas. Then he spoke again, and the land flourished with life. Green grass, mighty trees, and vibrant plants of every kind, each bearing fruit and seeds to multiply across the earth. Day 4, the sun, moon, and stars. On the fourth day, God set the sun in the sky to rule over the day, radiating warmth and light. He placed the moon to govern the night and adorned the heavens with countless stars. These celestial bodies would mark time, seasons, and years, declaring his glory throughout the universe. Day 5, life in the waters and skies. On the fifth day, the silent seas were filled with movement as God created creatures of the deep, great whales, swift fish, and all kinds of marine life. He also formed the birds of the air, giving them wings to soar above the land. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, filling the waters and the skies." Day 6, animals and the first humans. On the sixth day, God spoke, and the earth brought forth living creatures of every kind, majestic beasts, gentle livestock, and tiny creatures that crawled upon the ground. Each was formed according to its kind, filling the earth with life. Then, in his grandest act of creation, God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." With divine care, he formed the first man, Adam, from the dust of the earth and breathed into him the breath of life. Adam became a living soul, distinct from all other creatures, created to rule over the earth and reflect God's nature. Seeing that it was not good for man to be alone, God caused Adam to fall into a deep sleep. From his rib, he fashioned the first woman, Eve, a perfect companion and helper. When Adam awoke, he rejoiced, recognizing her as bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh. Together, they were the pinnacle of God's creation. Day 7, a day of rest and blessing. On the seventh day, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. He rested from his work, not out of fatigue, but to set apart this day as holy. This day of rest, known as the Sabbath, was a divine blessing, a time of peace and reflection on the beauty of creation. The Garden of Eden, a paradise of harmony. God planted a magnificent garden in Eden, a paradise filled with every tree that was pleasant to the sight and good for food. At its center stood two special trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam and Eve lived in perfect harmony, walking with God and enjoying his presence. There was no pain, no sorrow, only joy and peace in the garden. God gave them dominion over all living things and commanded them to be fruitful and multiply. But he also gave them one command: not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For on the day they did, they would surely die. For now, creation stood perfect and untainted, a reflection of God's divine goodness. The fall of man. The Garden of Eden was a paradise, full of life, beauty, and peace. Adam and Eve lived in perfect harmony, walking with God and enjoying all He had provided. Every tree in the garden bore delicious fruit, freely available to them, except for one, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God had warned them, "You may eat freely from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For on the day you eat of it, you will surely die." Yet, unseen by Adam and Eve, something dark lurked among the trees. The serpent's deception. One day, as Eve walked through the garden, she heard a voice. A serpent, coiled around a branch, gazed at her with knowing eyes. But this was no ordinary serpent. This was Satan in disguise, full of cunning and deceit. In a smooth, sly voice, the serpent asked, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" Eve hesitated but answered, "We may eat from any tree, but God said we must not eat from the tree in the middle of the garden, nor touch it, or we will die." The serpent let out a quiet chuckle. "You will not surely die," he said. "God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like Him, knowing good and evil." Eve looked at the tree again. The fruit was beautiful, ripe, and tempting. The serpent's words stirred a desire in her heart. What if God was keeping something from them? What if this fruit could make her wise? Slowly she reached out, plucked the fruit, and took a bite. The taste was sweet, but the moment she swallowed, something changed. She felt different. A strange awareness filled her mind. Then she turned to Adam, who had been watching in silence. She offered him the fruit, and he took it. Without questioning, he ate. The knowledge of sin. The moment Adam took the last bite, their eyes were opened. They looked at each other and realized something they had never noticed before. They were naked. Shame, a feeling they had never known, washed over them. They quickly gathered leaves and sewed them together, trying to cover themselves. But no matter how they tried to hide, they couldn't escape the heavy weight in their hearts. Something had changed. God's judgment. As the sun began to set, a familiar presence moved through the garden. God was walking among the trees. His voice echoed through the air. "Adam, where are you?" Trembling, Adam and Eve hid behind a tree. They had never been afraid of God before, but now fear gripped them. Adam finally answered, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." God's voice was sorrowful. "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree I commanded you not to eat from?" Adam lowered his head and pointed at Eve. "The woman you gave me, she gave me the fruit, and I ate it." Eve looked up, her eyes filled with guilt. "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." God turned to the serpent, his voice filled with righteous anger. "Because you have done this, you are cursed above all animals. You will crawl on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." Then he turned to Eve. "Because you listened to the serpent, you will experience pain in childbirth. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." Finally, he looked at Adam. "Because you listened to your wife and disobeyed my command, the ground is now cursed because of you. Through painful toil, you will work the land all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles will grow, and by the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the dust from which you came. For you were made from dust, and to dust you shall return." Banished from Eden, God's words filled the air like a heavy storm. Adam and Eve knew what was coming. Because of their sin, they could no longer stay in Eden. The paradise that had once been their home was now forbidden to them. God made garments of animal skin to clothe them, a sign that their sin required a sacrifice. Then, with sorrow, he led them out of the garden. As they stepped beyond the gates, God placed mighty cherubim and a flaming sword to guard the entrance to the tree of life. Never again could they return. Sin had entered the world. Pain, suffering, and death had become a reality. And yet, in the midst of judgment, there was also a promise. One day, a Savior would come, a descendant of Eve, who would crush the serpent's head and restore what had been lost. The story of redemption had begun. Cain and Abel, the first brothers and the first murder. Adam and Eve, though banished from Eden, continued their lives in the world outside, learning to work the land and raise a family. In time, Eve gave birth to 2 sons, Cain the elder and Abel the younger. Cain became a farmer, toiling under the sun, working the earth just as his father Adam had been commanded. Day after day, he tilled the soil, planting seeds, watching them sprout, and harvesting crops. His hands were rough, his skin darkened by the sun, and his heart grew proud of the work he accomplished. Abel, on the other hand, became a shepherd, caring for flocks that grazed on the open fields. He spent his days among the sheep, guiding them to green pastures and cool waters. He was gentle and patient, always attentive to their needs. His heart was filled with gratitude, knowing that God had blessed him with strong and healthy animals. The offering to God. As they grew, both Cain and Abel understood that everything they had came from God. And so they brought offerings before the Lord to show their devotion and gratitude. Cain, proud of his harvest, gathered some of the fruits and grains from his fields and placed them before the Lord as an offering. But he did not choose the best of his crops. He gave only what was convenient, keeping the finest produce for himself. Abel, however, carefully selected the firstborn of his flock, the best and healthiest lambs. He laid them upon the altar, offering them to God with a sincere heart, knowing that true worship requires giving the best. And God looked with favor upon Abel and his offering. A divine presence surrounded the altar, and Abel's sacrifice was accepted with joy. But Cain's offering was rejected, not because it was from the soil, but because his heart was not right. He had not given out of love and faith, but out of mere obligation. The jealousy of Cain. Cain watched as his brother's offering was accepted, while his own was ignored. His heart burned with anger, his fists clenched, and his face darkened with rage. Jealousy and resentment took root in his soul, twisting his thoughts. God saw his anger and spoke to him. "Why are you so angry, Cain? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, you will be accepted. But if you refuse, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." God had warned Cain, giving him a chance to overcome his anger, but Cain refused to listen. His jealousy grew into hatred, and in his heart, he made a terrible decision. The first murder. One day, Cain spoke to Abel, "Come, let's go out to the field." Abel followed his brother, unaware of the danger that lurked in Cain's heart. The field stretched far and wide, and no one else was around. Then, in a moment of blind rage, Cain attacked Abel. He struck him down with his hands, his strength fueled by jealousy and anger. Abel cried out in pain, but Cain did not stop. His brother fell to the ground, lifeless and still. The first murder in history had been committed, the first life taken by human hands. Cain stood over Abel's body, his chest rising and falling, his hands stained with blood. But as the rage faded, it was replaced by something worse, guilt and fear. The earth beneath him had swallowed his brother's innocent blood, and the heavens seemed to grow silent. God's judgment on Cain. Then the voice of the Lord called out, "Cain, where is your brother Abel?" Cain trembled but tried to hide his guilt. His voice was cold and defiant as he answered, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" But God's voice thundered with sorrow and justice. "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Cain fell to his knees, realizing that his sin had been exposed. But it was too late. Judgment had come. God said to him, "Now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you, You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain's heart sank. The land which he had worked so hard to cultivate would no longer bear fruit for him. He had lost everything. In desperation, he cried out, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Anyone who finds me will kill me." But God, in his mercy, placed a mark on Cain, a divine sign of protection. Though he was condemned to wander the earth, no one would harm him, for God had decreed it. Cain's fate. Cain left the presence of the Lord, carrying the weight of his sin. He wandered far from his home, settling in a distant land called Nod, which meant wandering. Though he built a city and had children of his own, his heart was forever restless. He had chosen sin over righteousness, jealousy over love, and violence over peace. His brother Abel was gone, but his story would never be forgotten. He had been the first to offer a righteous sacrifice, the first to show true faith. And though his life was cut short, his legacy endured. As the generations passed, Abel's name would be remembered among the faithful, while Cain's would serve as a warning, a reminder that sin, when left unchecked, leads to destruction, a lesson for all. The story of Cain and Abel is not just a tale of the past, it speaks to every heart today. It reminds us that God desires our best, not just what is convenient. Jealousy and anger, if left unchecked, lead to destruction. Sin is always waiting, but we must master it. God is merciful, even when we fall. Cain's choice led to suffering, but Abel's faithfulness left a legacy that echoed through time. Will we choose the path of Cain, the path of jealousy, pride, and destruction? Or will we choose the path of Abel, the path of faith, righteousness, and true worship? The choice is ours. As the years passed, humanity strayed far from righteousness. Towns and cities filled with violence, deceit, and lawlessness. Men sought power and pleasure, turning away from their Creator. Their hearts grew dark, and their thoughts were only evil, day and night. God looked upon the earth he had so carefully crafted, and his heart was filled with sorrow. The world he made with love was now drenched in sin. He spoke in his divine wisdom, "I will wipe mankind from the face of the earth, for they have filled it with corruption." But amid the wickedness, one man stood apart, Noah, a man of faith who walked in obedience to God. God's command to build the ark. One day, in the quiet of Noah's dwelling, a mighty voice called out to him, "Noah, I have seen your righteousness. Build an ark, a great vessel of safety, for I will send a flood upon the earth to destroy all living things. But you and your family shall be saved." God gave Noah precise instructions. A massive structure, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. It would have 3 levels, a single door, and be sealed with pitch to withstand the coming storm. With unwavering faith, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, took up their tools and began to build. Day after day, under the scorching sun and cold nights, they labored, cutting wood, shaping beams, and sealing the ark as God had commanded. The people of the land mocked Noah. "Why build a ship in the middle of dry land?" they laughed. But Noah warned them, "Turn from your wicked ways, for judgment is coming." Yet they refused to listen, gathering the animals and entering the ark. As the final plank was placed, a mysterious stillness fell over the land. Then from the forests, plains, and mountains, animals began to arrive, 2 of every kind, male and female, just as God had commanded. Lions walked beside lambs, great eagles soared above, and even the smallest creatures, the ants and beetles, scurried in perfect order. Noah and his family gathered food and supplies, preparing for the unknown. Then, as the dark clouds gathered in the sky, God himself shut the door of the ark, sealing them inside. The great flood begins. Then the heavens opened. Rain poured down in torrents, filling the rivers, the valleys, and the streets of every city. The fountains of the deep burst forth, and mighty waves swallowed the land. People ran in terror, climbing to rooftops and mountain peaks, crying for mercy, but it was too late. The waters rose higher and higher until all that once lived on the earth was no more. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain continued, and Noah and his family drifted upon the endless ocean of destruction, carried only by the will of God. The waters begin to recede. Then one day the rain ceased. The winds of heaven blew, and the waters began to recede. Mountain peaks emerged from the deep, and the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. Noah, longing for a sign, released a raven. It flew back and forth but found no resting place. Then he sent a dove. It returned with nothing. 7 days later he sent the dove again, and this time it returned with a fresh olive leaf in its beak. Tears filled Noah's eyes. Land had appeared. God's mercy had prevailed. A new beginning and God's covenant. At last, God commanded Noah, "Come out of the ark, you and your family, and let every living creature go forth and fill the earth once more." Stepping onto dry ground, Noah fell to his knees in worship. He built an altar and offered sacrifices to the Lord in thanksgiving. Then, a great rainbow stretched across the sky, painting the heavens with colors never seen before. God spoke, "Never again will I destroy the earth by flood. This rainbow is my covenant with you and all generations to come." Noah's family, the only survivors, would begin anew, spreading across the land. But the lesson of the flood would be remembered forever, a warning of God's judgment, yet also a promise of his mercy. The story of Noah and the flood is a powerful tale of faith, obedience, and redemption. In a world drowning in sin, one man's trust in God led to salvation. The ark symbolizes refuge, and the rainbow stands as a symbol of God's eternal promise, a reminder that even in judgment, his love remains. Will we choose the path of the wicked, or will we walk in faith like Noah? The Tower of Babel, expanded narrative. After the great flood, Noah's descendants spread across the land, multiplying and filling the earth. They were united, speaking one language, and worked together as one people. As they journeyed east, they came upon a vast plain in the land of Shinar, a fertile and rich land where they decided to settle. But as time passed, pride took root in their hearts. They no longer desired to glorify God, but sought to make a name for themselves. One day, the leaders of the people gathered and spoke. "Come, let us build for ourselves a city with a tower that reaches the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, so we will not be scattered across the earth." The people agreed, and they began to work with great determination. They molded bricks and hardened them with fire, making them strong and durable. Instead of using stone and mortar, they used this new material, advancing their knowledge in construction. Towering higher and higher, the great structure began to take shape, a monument to their own glory, their own power. Day after day, the tower rose, piercing the sky. The people looked up at their creation with pride, believing they were reaching the heavens. But God, watching from above, saw their arrogance. He saw that their hearts had turned away from him, and they sought to exalt themselves rather than honor their Creator. He knew that if they remained united in their pride, nothing would stop them from rebelling further. So the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they all have one language. If they continue like this, nothing will be impossible for them. Let us go down and confuse their language, so they will no longer understand one another." In an instant, the people's speech was turned into many different tongues. Workers called out to each other, but could no longer understand their neighbors. Confusion and frustration spread among them. They shouted, gestured, and tried to communicate, but their words were meaningless to one another. The great city that once echoed with unity now rang with chaos. Unable to continue their work, the people abandoned the tower. Families and groups that spoke the same language gathered together and left, traveling in different directions to settle in new lands. The once mighty project was left unfinished, a crumbling monument to human pride. The place became known as Babel, meaning confusion, because it was there that the Lord confused the language of the world and scattered mankind across the earth. Thus, the nations were divided, and the people learned that no kingdom built on arrogance and rebellion against God would ever stand. Abraham, the father of nations. In a world filled with idol worship and uncertainty, one man's faith would change history forever. His name was Abram, later called Abraham, and through him, God would create a great nation. God's call and promise. One day in the land of Ur, God spoke to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you." With unwavering faith, Abram obeyed. He took his wife, Sarai, later Sarah, his nephew Lot, and all their belongings, setting out on a journey to a land unknown, Canaan. When he arrived, God appeared to him again, saying, Look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, so shall your offspring be. Though God promised him countless descendants, Abram and Sarai had no children, and they were growing old. Yet Abram believed in God's promise. The birth of Ishmael, years passed, and still Sarai remained childless. Doubt crept into her heart, and in desperation she gave her Egyptian servant Hagar to Abram, saying, "Perhaps I can build a family through her." Hagar conceived and bore a son, Ishmael. But this was not the child of promise. Though Ishmael would become a great nation, God's covenant would be fulfilled through another, God's covenant and the birth of Isaac. When Abram was 99 years old, God appeared to him again, saying, "I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will establish my covenant with you and make you the father of many nations." God changed Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah, promising that she would bear a son. Sarah laughed at the idea. She was 90 years old. But God declared, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" A year later, Isaac was born, the child of promise. Sarah rejoiced, saying, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." Abraham's ultimate test, the sacrifice of Isaac. Years later, God tested Abraham's faith. He called to him, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." With a heavy heart, Abraham obeyed. He and Isaac journeyed for 3 days. When they reached the place, Isaac asked, "Father, where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham replied, "God will provide the lamb." As he bound Isaac and raised his knife, an angel called out, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld your son." Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket. He sacrificed it instead, naming the place, "The Lord will provide." The legacy of Abraham. Isaac grew up and married Rebekah, and they had twin sons, Esau and Jacob. Through Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel would be born, and through this lineage, God's promise would be fulfilled. God's covenant with Abraham was unbreakable, and his descendants would one day bless all nations, a promise ultimately fulfilled through Jesus Christ. Jacob's story is one of struggle, transformation, and divine destiny. His life was marked by conflict, love, and faith as he became the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob and Esau, a struggle for blessing. Jacob and Esau, twin brothers born to Isaac and Rebekah, could not have been more different. Esau, the elder, was strong and rugged, a skilled hunter with a love for the outdoors. Jacob, however, was quiet and thoughtful, preferring to stay close to home. One day, Esau returned from hunting, exhausted and famished. Jacob, cooking a pot of lentil stew, saw an opportunity. "Sell me your birthright," he said. Desperate, Esau agreed, trading his sacred inheritance for a simple meal. Later, with his mother's help, Jacob deceived his blind father Isaac into giving him the firstborn's blessing. Dressed in Esau's clothes and with goat skins covering his arms to mimic Esau's hairy skin, Jacob tricked his father. The blessing, once spoken, could not be undone. When Esau discovered the deception, his anger burned, and he vowed to kill Jacob. Fearing for his life, Jacob fled to his uncle Laban's house, leaving behind the only home he had ever known. Jacob's time in Haran, love and labor. In Haran, Jacob met Rachel, Laban's beautiful daughter, and love struck him instantly. He agreed to work 7 years to marry her, but when the wedding night came, Laban deceived him, giving him Leah, Rachel's older sister, instead. Furious but determined, Jacob worked another 7 years for Rachel. Over time, Jacob's family grew. Through Rachel, Leah, and their maidservants Bilhah and Zilpah, he had 12 sons, each destined to become the father of a great tribe. Jacob's transformation, wrestling with God. Years later, after growing wealthy, Jacob decided to return home, but he feared Esau's wrath. On the journey, he sent gifts ahead to appease his brother. That night, alone by a river, Jacob had a mysterious encounter. A man, no ordinary man, but an angel, appeared and wrestled with him until dawn. Jacob refused to let go until he received a blessing. The angel touched Jacob's hip, dislocating it, yet still, Jacob held on. "Your name shall no longer be Jacob but Israel," the angel declared, "for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed." Wounded but transformed, Jacob limped forward. No longer the deceiver he once was, but a man changed by divine encounter. The 12 sons, the birth of a nation. Jacob's 12 sons became the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. Reuben, the firstborn, though he later lost his birthright. Simeon and Levi, known for their fierce anger in avenging their sister Dinah. Judah, the ancestor of kings, including David and Jesus Christ. Dan, a leader of judges. Naphtali, known for swiftness and agility. Gad, a warrior tribe. Asher, blessed with prosperity and abundance. Issachar, valued for wisdom and hard work. Zebulun, known for seafaring and commerce. Joseph, the dreamer, sold into slavery but later saved his family. Benjamin, the youngest, whose tribe became known for courage. Jacob's life was filled with trials, but through it all, he remained part of God's great plan. From his 12 sons came the 12 tribes of Israel, forming a nation chosen by God. Joseph, from slave to ruler. Joseph was the beloved son of Jacob, born to him in old age from his favorite wife Rachel. Unlike his brothers, Joseph was treated with special favor. Jacob even gave him a beautiful robe of many colors, a symbol of distinction and love. But this favoritism bred jealousy in the hearts of his older brothers. Joseph also had extraordinary dreams. In one, he saw sheaves of wheat bowing to his own sheaf. In another, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed before him. When he shared these visions, his brothers burned with anger. "Do you think you will rule over us?" they mocked. Even Jacob was puzzled, though he kept Joseph's words in mind. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were grazing their flocks far from home. As Joseph approached, his brothers saw him in the distance. Their jealousy turned to rage, and they plotted to kill him. "Here comes the dreamer," they sneered. But Reuben, the eldest, convinced them not to shed blood. Instead, they threw him into a dry pit. Later, a caravan of Ishmaelite traders passed by on their way to Egypt. Seeing an opportunity, the brothers sold Joseph as a slave for 20 pieces of silver. To cover up their crime, they dipped his robe in goat's blood and told Jacob that a wild beast had devoured him. Heartbroken, Jacob mourned bitterly, refusing to be comforted. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, a high-ranking officer in Pharaoh's court. Despite his misfortune, Joseph remained faithful to God. He worked diligently, and God blessed him. Potiphar noticed Joseph's wisdom and integrity, making him the head of his household. But trouble soon followed. Potiphar's wife became infatuated with Joseph and tried to seduce him. Loyal to both his master and God, Joseph refused. "How can I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" he said. Enraged by his rejection, she falsely accused him of assault. Potiphar, though unsure of Joseph's guilt, had him thrown into prison. Even in prison, Joseph's faith remained unshaken. God granted him favor with the prison warden, who put him in charge of the other prisoners. One day, two of Pharaoh's servants, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, had troubling dreams. Joseph, gifted in dream interpretation, explained that the cupbearer would be restored to his position while the baker would be executed. His words came true, but the cupbearer forgot Joseph for 2 long years. Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream. One night, Pharaoh had a disturbing dream. He saw 7 fat cows devoured by 7 skinny cows, and 7 healthy ears of grain swallowed by 7 withered ones. None of his advisors could explain the meaning. At last, the cupbearer remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about him. Joseph was summoned from prison, quickly cleaned up, and brought before the king. "I cannot interpret dreams," Joseph humbly said, "but God can." He explained that the dreams foretold 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine. He advised Pharaoh to store grain during the good years to prepare for the coming crisis. Pharaoh was so impressed that he made Joseph his second in command, placing him over all of Egypt. He dressed him in fine robes, placed a signet ring on his hand, and gave him an Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah. Overnight, Joseph went from prisoner to ruler. The famine and the brothers' reunion. As Joseph predicted, the famine struck and people from all over came to Egypt for food. Among them were Joseph's own brothers, who did not recognize him in his royal garments. He tested them, accusing them of being spies and demanding they bring their youngest brother Benjamin. When they returned with Benjamin, Joseph could no longer hold back his emotions. In a dramatic moment, he revealed his identity. "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery," he said. The brothers trembled in fear, expecting revenge, but instead Joseph reassured them, "Do not be afraid. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, to save many lives." Joseph embraced his brothers, weeping. he sent for his father Jacob, and the entire family moved to Egypt, settling in the land of Goshen. Thus, the story of Israel in Egypt began, a story that would shape the destiny of God's people. The end of Genesis and the beginning of a nation. As the story of Genesis draws to a close, the legacy of Jacob and Joseph is secured. The once small family, bound by blood and faith, has now multiplied into a mighty nation. The death of Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes, marks the end of one chapter. His sons, once mere dreamers and wanderers, are now the heads of the families that would shape the future of Israel. Joseph, the dreamer, who had risen from slavery to power, takes his final breath in Egypt. Yet before he dies, he assures his brothers that God will one day deliver their descendants from Egypt. Joseph's death marks the end of an era, but his faith in God's promise still echoes in the hearts of his people. As Jacob's family settles in Egypt, their numbers grow rapidly. What began as a small family of 12 sons has now become a thriving nation. Yet they remain in Egypt, strangers in a foreign land. Their time there will be marked by both prosperity and hardship, as the pharaohs change and new rulers come into power. Though they may be slaves, God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are still alive. The descendants of these patriarchs are growing, preparing for the next chapter in their journey, one that will lead to freedom, a land of their own, and the birth of a nation that will change the world. The stage is set for the grand story of Exodus, where the mighty deliverance of Israel will take place. God, who has been faithful through the trials of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, will show his power once again through Moses, leading the Israelites out of bondage and into the land promised to their ancestors. Genesis ends with a sense of anticipation, knowing that the best is yet to come. The God who shaped the world and made covenants with his people is about to do something even greater, a great act of deliverance that will define his people and shape the future of nations. As we close the pages of Genesis, we see the beginning of a people destined for greatness. This is just the start of a journey that will stretch through the ages. The end of Genesis marks the beginning of a nation, Israel, and the unfolding of God's incredible plan for his people. Final thoughts. Genesis, the opening book of the Bible, is more than just a historical account. It's a sweeping epic, a story of creation, where the universe bursts forth from the mind of God, of sin, as humanity's first misstep brings darkness into the world, of judgment, as God's justice falls upon a corrupted earth, but also of redemption, as God's grace begins to weave its healing touch upon the brokenness of creation. Through the early stories of Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, Genesis sets the foundation for the entire Bible. It is here in these pages that we see God's unfailing plan to restore mankind, first through the covenants he makes with his people, and in time through the ultimate fulfillment of his promise, the coming of Jesus Christ. As Genesis ends, we are left with a profound sense of hope. The God who spoke the world into existence is not finished with it. The trials and tribulations of mankind are far from over, but God's promise to bless and restore his people is steadfast. From the dawn of time to the heights of faith in Abraham and Joseph, we glimpse the journey of a people, God's people, who, though imperfect and often wayward, are deeply loved by their Creator. It's a journey of faith, of struggle, and ultimately of divine victory. In these ancient stories, we see God's eternal love unfolding, a love that would one day be made flesh in the person of Jesus Christ, the ultimate Redeemer. His life, death, and resurrection will be the fulfillment of every promise made throughout Genesis. What begins with the first breath of creation culminates in the new creation found in Christ. So, as we close the book of Genesis, we don't simply turn the page to another story. We open the door to an eternal journey of redemption, where mankind's relationship with God is restored and his promises fulfilled, ushering in the kingdom of heaven, where light will triumph over darkness and life will overcome death.